Great. Yeah. So we're live now. So yeah, we can see the participant number is going up. Alice, I think maybe we're ready to start.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our event on the NDCs that Africa wants. Thank you so much for joining us on a Sunday afternoon of Africa Climate Week. As you all know, it's Africa Climate Week, so we're very excited. We are taking the pulse of climate action in the region. Our event today is doing the same. It's exploring to what extent nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, from countries in Africa reflect the necessary ambition for a 1.5 degrees net zero climate resilient world, and what is next for climate action in Africa. As you all know, 2021 is a crucial year for tackling the climate and biodiversity crisis, plus rising inequalities and the devastating pandemic. Even as we begin to emerge from this shadow of COVID-19, Africa is still on the front line of climate and nature loss. The ability of our governments to respond to climate change by building resilience and adapting to the impacts we are already seeing is quite limited. But the NDCs that governments are working on at the moment ahead of this year's COP26 climate talks provide us with a great opportunity to build capacity and also to build consensus among others to work together on this whole of government and a whole of society approach. So today we are going to do two things. We will have a group of panelists who are joining us to discuss the NDC Africa wants, but first we are also going to launch a report. And I want to talk about that report. So the report is guidelines for decision makers in Africa to highlight progress and opportunities across elements of a checklist that we developed a few months ago. In an effort to foster enhancement, WWF developed an NDCs We Want checklist to benchmark all the updated NDCs in 2020 and 2021 across 5 areas: ambition, mitigation, adaptation and finance; fostering systemic change, how well they work across governments; inclusiveness and participation in the NDC design process by all stakeholders; contribution to sustainable development; and systems for tracking progress. In the report that we are launching today, WWF has added a 6th criteria, and that is to consider efforts for a green recovery. How do these NDCs respond to a green recovery, ensure that we recover from the pandemic in a green way? So using this checklist enables WWF to hold countries accountable and to shine a light on the main advances and challenges towards implementation of the Paris Agreement. Now, as of 12 September 2021, 20 countries in Africa have submitted new or updated NDCs. Many of these submissions occur just as the close to the latest UNFCCC cutoff date at the end of July for the NDC synthesis report. Thus far, we have been able to assess 9 of these NDCs against our NDCs We Want checklist, and we are working hard to update this with more assessments. As you know, the synthesis report for the UNFCCC has been published, and it contains some worrying findings. The available NDCs of all 191 parties taken together imply a sizable increase in global greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 compared to 2010 of about 16%, and may lead to a temperature rise of 2.7 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. So action is needed from all countries, and again it presses the importance of adaptation and resilience in African countries on the front line of climate change. So our event today is part of a series of assessments that WWF has been doing across regional climate weeks. We've explored similar ideas and similar events in Latin America during Latin America Climate Week, We recognized the progress that had been made in NDC submissions and looked ahead to implementation. We also highlighted the impressive progress in participation and inclusiveness and the lessons that are learned there. In Asia Pacific, during the Asia Pacific Climate Week, we celebrated the diversity across the region alongside the opportunities for collaboration in key sectors. We also highlighted the key role of nature-based solutions in these diverse landscapes. And in this report for Africa, we recognize the road ahead for Africa in its challenges, but also the opportunities, especially in addressing multiple challenges. We highlight the role of international support, but also how the region can engage on this on its own terms. We will be sharing the report at the end of this, and please, we invite you to take a look at the report and our work online on the NDCs We Want initiative and my blog, which is also published today. So that is the report, and now I'm going to move us to the main event, which is our panelists that have joined us today to talk about the NDCs that we want. Today, I am pleased to have with us three high-level speakers. First, I have Mitika Mwenda, who will be joining shortly. I think he hasn't yet joined, but I will introduce him anyway. Mitika Mwenda is the Executive Director and Secretary of PACJA, which is the Pan-Africa Climate Justice Alliance. He currently chairs the Institutional Collaboration Partnership of the Climate Research for Development in Africa and represents civil society in the Steering Committee for Climate and Development for Africa program, ClimeDev. He was recently elected once again as chair of Southern CSO Observers to the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility of the World Bank. So Mithika will be joining us later. I also have with us Louise Node. Louise joins us today as a representative of the Alliance for Climate Action South Africa. The Alliance for Climate Action private sector coalition members work together in a wide variety of ways, in person and virtually, in small group encounters and large public fora. It's coordinated by WWF, C40 Cities, and the National Business Initiative. The Alliance is a platform for decisive and collective action for private sector on climate change in South Africa. Welcome, Louise. Last but not least, I have Matteo Bigoni. Matteo joins us from the FSD Africa. He is a senior climate finance specialist with the capital markets team. FSD is a development agency wholly supported by the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, or FCDO, with a mandate to strengthen capital markets in Africa. Their core theme is green finance in order to mobilize green capital flows into the African continent in line with the Paris Agreement. So I'll be talking to the panelists soon, but just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. I will be asking the panelists 2 questions in turn, and then after that, we will be able to open it up to the audience. We invite you to place some questions in the chat, which we'll get to at the end. Our overarching topic with them is to explore the partnerships and opportunities across sectors to engage on NDC implementation and how this can build the climate action that we want in Africa, including as citizens and civil society. So I will move now to the panelists. And since Mitika is not here yet, I will start with you, Louise.
Okay.
Good, welcome, Louise. So my first question to you, Louise, is what is the role of the Marrakesh Partnership and similar initiatives in NDC implementation? And how can this support the NDCs that Africa wants?
Thank you, Alice. So just to say hello to all the people on the webinar and to acknowledge that we have a princess among us, Her Royal Highness Princess Jigma, if I have that correct. So thank you for gracing us, ma'am, Your Royal Highness. Okay, so let's talk about the Marrakesh Partnership. So I think a very important thing happened in Lima, where the Lima Paris Action Agenda was set up. Was this acknowledgement by the UNFCCC and the COP presidents of the time that, you know, national governments need to lead on the transition to a low carbon, climate resilient economy. And we need those very ambitious commitments from them. But unless that is accompanied by action in the real economy amongst the private sector, amongst subnational governments, national governments cannot deliver on those NDCs without that action from below. And you know, the two high-level climate champions were appointed, and they have been driving this action agenda. And there's now this sort of Marrakesh partnership. And we expect that at the coming COP at the end of this year, that this kind of complementary track continues under the UNFCCC banner. And the whole idea of the Marrakesh partnership is to foster collaboration between national governments and these subnational and non-party stakeholders. So in South Africa, we have set up something called the Alliance for Climate Action, which is currently an alliance of subnational governments. We have 5 of our major cities are in the alliance, and the private sector. And it is one of several such alliances around the world. There's one in Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, going to the east, Japan, Vietnam. We've recently launched one in Australia called Better Futures Australia. And then there's one in the USA and this one in South Africa. And it provides a platform for this kind of collaboration between governments and these other stakeholders. But actually, it's also not only a national government conversation. You know, it's those stakeholders talking to each other as well. So we are seeing, for example, that our city members have finalized their climate action plans, and which are 1.5 degree target aligned and aiming for net zero by 2050. And so they then are under the Alliance for Climate Action meeting with business to say, okay, we can't do this alone. Where are the opportunities to work together and deliver on this? I must say that our members in the Alliance for Climate Action South Africa are very ambitious. Right from the start, they stepped out, they said, we are standing up for a net zero economy in South Africa. We will match that with our own action, and we will collaborate with each other to do more than we could have maybe done alone. And we will call upon our government, urge it and support it in this net zero by 2050 mission. So I think that's that kind of platform is highly significant for delivery on NDCs in line with the Marrakesh partnership idea. Thanks, ma'am. I'll leave it there for now.
No, thank you so much, Louise. That's very, very good. And especially when you talk about, you know, the need for national governments to lead, and you talk about the action from below, but also the progress that has been made by cities on their climate action plans. I will move to you, Matteo. One of the biggest challenges that governments are facing as we go forward and getting out of the COVID-19 to really implement these ambitious climate actions is, of course, finance. So tell us, what is the role, what are capital markets, and what is the current role of capital markets in supporting this NDC's ambition and implementation in Africa?
So thank you, Alice, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, as an introduction to capital markets, basically capital markets are the whole array, a spectrum of stakeholders such as banks, issuers, underwriters, investors that really work together globally to raise capital, to raise funds that can then be invested. And generally, this takes the shape and form of short-term capital, such as bank loans, right? 2, 3 years, 5 years, perhaps, but also long-term capital 10, 15, 20, and 30, even 50, 100 years, such as bonds. And so it is the interaction of these stakeholders, market stakeholders, to create a bankable series of bankable projects that can be invested in, and that can basically result in physical project and assets, and that can basically help shift capital around the world from where it's currently sitting, such as pension funds, for instance, to where it's needed and where it can be more efficiently used, such as regional projects in Africa, regional economies in Africa, country-specific economies in Africa where it's needed. And obviously investors in return get a profit, which is determined by market conditions, the risk attached to both the project and the entity issuing the either debt or the entity that issues equity, etc. And so the investor gets a profit out of the investments that they make. Financial markets and capital markets was the first time in Paris, if we all remember the 2015 agreement in Paris, that was actually the very first time that capital markets and green finance were actually included in the agreement as one of the tools that the society can use in order to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So there's a role of capital markets and green finance, climate finance, into basically building the type of infrastructure that we need in order to build that net zero carbon future by 2050. And so what our work FSD Africa and the work of the global financial system is to actually channel that flow of capital into project and assets, those project and assets that we need to see aligned by with the Paris Agreement. And the work that we do specifically at FSD Africa is to look at how this capital can be channeled into not just typically classical project finance such as transport or renewable energy, but also nature-based solutions, because we think that the GDP and economic growth of many African economies is disproportionately affected by natural capital, nature-based solutions. And so how we can actually turn nature-based solutions and natural capital into an asset that is bankable, that can basically generate a profit, and that can actually attract global capital from around the world, both from international investors, but also practically from domestic investors in the various countries of Africa. Over to you, Alice.
Yes, thank you so much. Capital markets have been a long time coming, and I think it's good. It's really great to see that this is that they're starting to really look towards bankable nature-based solutions. I think that will be very, very important, as those are 30% of the climate solution. So before I come back to you, Luis, I guess we could see we have a participant who has raised a hand. Maybe let's take a question. I know Mitsika is still having trouble joining in. Shali, Fernanda, please.
Fernanda, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah. I'm interested in exactly what you mentioned about the bankable solutions for nature and nature-based solutions. I think this is something that has been also discussed for a while in the climate discussions, but we have never been able to bring it to the level needed. So if you could comment further on that, that would be very interesting.
Sure. So this is why FSD Africa is really focusing on bankable nature-based solution projects. This is typically, they're quite difficult to monetize, isn't it? I mean, the conservation of a forest. But that's the type of project that we need in 2050. We need to shift on a more nature-based kind of society and in a way reap the benefits of our oceans, of our ecosystems, in a way that is sustainable, in a way that actually benefits the wider society at large. And so if you think about assets such as, which we think are assets, regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture, sustainable forestry, and how we need those projects in order to basically thinking about forestry. We know that buildings need to become more sustainable, and the materials that we use for buildings needs to become more sustainable. Timber, lumber, we will need all of that. And at the same time, we need to stop impinging on natural resources unsustainably. So how can we turn forestry into even small-scale forestry with farmers and with small-scale agricultural units? How can we turn that into a large-scale shift in agriculture and forestry sector sort of based practices in a way that's sustainable and provides our cities with sustainable timber, with sustainable lumber, reaping at the same time the benefits of providing clean water to our cities and clean water for sustainable agricultural practices. Let us, not forget that nature-based solutions are actually at the interlink between adaptation and resilience and mitigation, because those are the type of project and assets that can provide obviously adaptation and resilient benefits, making agricultural systems more sustainable, more resilient to climate change, but also mitigation efforts, right? Because there are carbon sinks. Think about regenerative agriculture, all the carbon that can be trapped into the soil, etc. And so what you want to do is making sure that those systems are profitable, that there's a cash flow that can support a debt or a loan from the payments of those debts and those loans. So we need to make sure that there's a financial analysis behind it to make sure that we provide comfort to investors.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matteo. I'll come back to you later because I know that there's still several challenges that are faced by people to access these capital markets. They're still quite technical. And so that's maybe we'll come back to you to discuss that some more. But I see Mitika is here. Welcome, Mitika. And I am coming to you.
Thank you, Alice. And I know Tom was very nervous. He thought that I disappeared into church. Now this is church hour, so I am delaying the erratic network. But I'm here now. I hope you are hearing me well.
We are hearing you well, and thank you very much for sacrificing your Sunday afternoon to come and talk to us. And my first question to you is going to be about the role of civil society in driving NDC implementation, and particularly in ensuring that NDCs work for people. What are some of the, and maybe the second one will be, what are some of the opportunities and successes you've seen through the NDC development phase? So the first one is the role of civil society in driving NDC implementation and particularly making sure they work for people. And then any highlights or successes, opportunities and successes that you've seen through this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Agnes. I think that's a very good question. First, I'll start by thanking the WWF for organizing this very, very good event. We have worked with you for quite a while, and I think we are really happy that our partnership is evolving to really look at what our shared vision is going to mean to each other, particularly now driving the agenda which you are already talking about. And the point is, how are we going to ensure that the people at the front line of climate crisis, I'm talking about smallholder farmers, forest communities, fisher folk, women, smallholder women producers, get the benefits and are actively involved into not only decision-making, but also implementation. And that is the crunch of the matter in the implementation of NDCs. And that's what makes, in my view, the NDCs quite different and a Paris Agreement different from the previous pact. That is the Kyoto Protocol, which was patent-based. But one of the victories which we secured as non-state actors during the design of the Paris Agreement is that we anchored the non-state actors, including the civil society, communities, private sector, and those others into the framework. So this time is not, actually, I will not ask for the government, goodwill or tokenism or plead with the government to take action, because it is well defined the role of the non-state actors, particularly the civil society. So that is actually very important. We may not like the NDCs or the Paris Agreement is not that ambitious. That is not what we looked for as African civil society. No, it is not ambitious. In fact, it is voluntary, but there are things which we can run away with as we fight for a more ambitious framework into the future. So having said that then, for us, the NDCs are very crucial because they are designed as investment tools for implementation of climate action. And then the role of the civil society is very well defined. And what we have been doing and our role we see is to drive that change, to catalyze the transformation which we are looking for. May it be in renewable energy, the transition to low carbon, climate resilient, equitable, ecologically just development pathways through providing evidence either on policy and research. So that is very important. And as civil society, we need to do that. And that is what we have been doing in Africa. So providing evidence, and that evidence is provided through our very well elaborate research and policy analysis. Number two is really doing action on the ground. The complaints communities have been having is that the discourse on climate is quite that stratosphere. It is very high, far from them at negotiations, and the nearer it comes, even the implementation of the Paris Agreement is at national level. The question is, how do we ensure that we trigger, rather than, because this is a more top-down process, how are we going to ensure that we trigger the locally led, bottom-up action which really is driven by the people? Because for people to participate in this process, we must build ownership on them. So what we are doing as a civil society is really to trigger that bottom-up, people-centered solutions which are actually relevant to the people and which people can own. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mithika. You really covered, all the points. Exciting, action on the ground vis-a-vis the dialogue in the stratosphere. Very important. The victory for non-state actors and the clearly defined role, but most importantly, having people reflected and having locally led. Thank you very much. And I invite participants to put your questions in the chat box, please. But I will go through my second round of questions to the panelists. Louise, what is needed to strengthen the collaboration with governments and key stakeholders in Africa? You talked about the Marrakesh Agreement providing for that. You talked about the work in Lima and the parallel track. And who are the key actors and what are the immediate steps really needed for this collaboration?
Thank you, Alice. So what I do want to talk a little bit about is when we're talking about the NDCs Africa ones, we all know that South Africa is the heaviest emitter on the continent. And so it's very exciting for me to bring you news hot off the press of our NDC, which has been approved by our cabinet, but has not yet been logged with the UNFCCC. But our Alliance for Climate Action, advocating for net zero by 2050, was part of the push for greater ambition in our NDC. So South Africa's previous target was to have a plateau between 2025 and 2030, with the top of that plateau being 614 megatons of CO2 equivalent per year across that time period. And that has dropped significantly to, in 2025, 510 megatons. And in 2030, the government tabled something which asked for 440 megatons in 2030. And due to advocacy from, the subnational governments, the business stakeholders, and the Climate Change Commission, that has dropped to 420 in 2030. And that is a 32% drop from where it was at 614. So, we, the Alliance for Climate Action South Africa, very much welcomes this greater ambition, while at the same time, we know that it is not adequate to South Africa's fair share of the global effort required. But, I think that is a strong step forward that others can welcome and also, do better themselves.
Yeah.
And another dimension of if I look at the 5 criteria of the NDCs we want, the other dimension is, these issues like Matika was raising, of inclusiveness, of sustainable development, and those kinds of elements. And I think we picked up in South Africa from the global negotiations is this concept of a just transition, which exactly speaks to, putting the people at the heart of the NDC, that the NDC and the transition must serve and leave no one behind. It must serve the majority of the people and it must leave no one behind. I think that's particularly important in Africa. And ma'am, if you would let me give you some examples.
Quickly, very quickly, because we are running out of time.
Okay.
So maybe 1 minute.
I mean, I think a big thing for Africa is that we are still looking at building coal plants in Africa. And, at this time in our history, and noting the IPCC recent Working Group 1 reports from the assessment review number 6, we cannot be putting more coal into the system. I mean, it's just flies in the face of all the science and destroys developmental gains.
Yeah.
I think for Africa, it can be very important to turn away from coal, don't start new coal, and go straight to renewable energy. And for us, the issue would be, that energy access must be extended to everybody, which means both that it must reach them and that it's affordable. And renewable energy is cheaper and it can be deployed in microgrids so that it can reach everybody and so on. So for me, that's a very clear thing we should be seeing in African NDCs. Thank you.
Thank you. No, absolutely. That's a very good point. And I think the good news is also that we're hearing from people like China saying they are no longer going to be funding coal. That's exciting, because if there's no money to fund this, then we can at least put more towards renewable energy. And I know that South Africa is also, as you have said, with your new NDC starting to really reduce that and address some of those issues. Matteo, back to you. Finance. We talked about finance. I think we're all excited about capital markets coming into the game and starting to make more finance available, as finance is a big part of us really implementing these ambitious NDCs. But like we said, there are some challenges. So what are the challenges and opportunities for governments in Africa here? What is really needed to scale up access to capital markets? Who is needed to do that?
Yeah. I mean, Alice, we all know that there's a mass infrastructure gap, both in terms of financing, but also the availability of infrastructure projects in Africa. And at the same time, there's a lot of money. There's finance capital, there's parked somewhere in financial system. They actually sitting there, not doing much, because we have very low interest rates, and is seeking projects to be invested in. If you look at the percentage of global green capital that is being financed and pumped into the system, Africa only receives 3% of that. So we need to ask ourselves is that why Africa receives 3% of global capital markets, green capital markets. And what we need to address here is the creation of two things. One, an enabling environment. for flows of capital to actually be channeled into the region. And this is where governments needs to work together to create an enabling environment from a regulatory and legal perspective that allows basically flows of money to be invested into the economies of African countries and to build the green economy. And second is really the lack of existing bankable projects. So the pipeline of existing bankable projects is a massive problem for us as an issue as financiers, because I speak to investors all the time that really would like to invest into Africa, but that there aren't enough high quality projects. So how do we work with project developers and banks to allow the creation of those pipeline of green projects? And I think that the NDCs here can actually play a very important role, because if you look at the NDCs, they say that some of the project's infrastructure has to be conditional to the availability of external sources of foreign external sources of finance.
Yeah.
And this is where capital markets can play a role to channel their finance. But at the same time, what investors want is a list of projects and assets that they can invest in. And NDCs actually provide the list. So what governments can do is provide as much detail as is possible in the NDCs, so that investors can use the NDCs as filters for making rational decisions for investments.
Okay.
For instance, what Louise was saying, we know that coal is not sustainable. We want more nature-based solutions. The NDCs can provide the screening criteria. So the investor can say, no, I'm not going to invest into coal. I'm going to invest in renewable energy. I'm going to invest in water. I'm going to invest in sustainable agriculture and low carbon transport. That is the role of NDCs.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that's a good point, using NDCs as a filter. And if it's not in the NDCs, then it's not findable. I guess maybe my one point on the bankable, so the bankable pipeline has always been, who's going to prime the pump? Because most of the time, investors are looking for those bankable projects ready-made. But as you know, they are not. There's help. There is still a step that we need to take to get a project to be bankable. And I think there is a role there. Of course, it can be played by other players as well. But there's a role there on actually helping the projects, moving them towards being bankable. But I think we can have a long day discussion on this, Matteo. We'll probably hold to that until we've done our next one. So before I bring you in, Mithika, there's two questions from the audience that I want us to talk about, and then I'll bring you in. Shali, can you get those questions?
Yeah. Hi, Alice. So we have two hands up at the moment, one from Ron and one from Thomas. So what I'm going to do is unmute each participant so that you guys can ask to the panel directly. Ron, you should be able to unmute yourself and talk to the panel.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
hello.
We can. Hi.
Yes.
Good afternoon, good evening, Excellency. I'm from Singapore. My name is Ron Tan. Basically, I think the current practice of using toxic chemical is very bad for the soil, land, and also very carbon intensive. So for any Africa to develop the green recovery, I think there's an emergency to stop the use of toxic chemical fertilizer like NPK from leaching into the water system. At the moment, the whole global system, every major waterways, ocean, coastal area, they are all destroyed by red tide resulting from leaching chemical fertilizer turning into algae. And at a later stage, all the oxygen in the ocean will be sucked into the photosynthesis and also the processing of carbon dioxide. So the result is that the marine organism is deprived of oxygen, and also there's no sunlight going through the water system for marine organism and biodiversity to prosper. So the removal of toxic NPK fertilizer is very critical at this stage for climate change. I thank you. So I don't know when the policy maker is going to remove it. The other thing is they have to remove the toxic subsidy too. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's great observations. I will ask Thomas to also bring in this question so that the panelists can address that at once. Yes, Thomas?
Maybe that's me. I'm not sure. I've been unmuted.
Yes.
Maybe Thomas can go first. I've seen him trying to talk. Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead, Thomas. Oh,
okay. It looks like there's a confusion. Maybe I will allow Mithika to come in, Shali.
yeah.
Mithika, you had, of course, the intervention from Ron, of course, but I will ask you your second question, which is how can you obviously talked about earlier about the role of civil society, well defined in the Paris Agreement. So I guess my question to you, I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'll ask you to elaborate a bit on how we can address multiple challenges, how we can work together, civil society and government and private sector, as Matteo is talking about, and others, to address multiple challenges, such as maybe the one that Ron has talked about. That's one challenge, including, and others. How do you see that collaboration working to address all these multiple challenges, really to drive systemic change? Mithika,
thank you. Thank you, Alice. I think, I want again to go back to the, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah, I want again to go back to the design of the Paris Agreement and even NDCs implementation. In its own design, actually, is to facilitate a multi-stakeholder approach in the implementation, because the previous framework, which was dominated by government, never worked. And so we need to tackle climate change, cannot be addressed by a single stakeholder. It is so enormous challenge that we need to work, all of us, and that's then the acknowledgement of the non-state actors by government. And so we need really to build on, and this is even acknowledged in the goal 17 of the Agenda 2030, that partnership actually are the ones which drive development. You cannot work alone in the current world to achieve anything. And that's why I think any framework, including even NDCs in countries, recognize really the importance of partnership, because that builds synergy based on each other's strength. Governments have their strength, civil society have their strength, the private sectors its strength. But more importantly, we need to also hold accountable ourselves on what we commit ourselves. The government have made commitment to cut emissions and to transition either to low carbon climate development pathways or to achieve a certain threshold of emission reduction, net zero, within a particular period of time. So they have acknowledged that we have to work together, and that is actually the way to go. There is no choice. So in every effort, in every country, you will find that no single actor says that even the way they are designed, NDCs, they are designed in such a way that they promote partnership and building synergy.
Thank you very much, Mithika. And I just want to highlight that there are some questions in the Q&A that some of you can answer. But Mithika, one for you before I let you go. There's a question from Irene Maura around how can we enhance climate financing from an African perspective, as opposed to relying on international financial commitments, which are sometimes not the easiest to access due to stringent requirements. Of course, some of this points to what Matteo is talking about. But do you have views on that one as well, Mithika, before I let you go?
Certainly, I have, Alice, and thank Irene for that point. But for Irene, I think I want to mention that the latter-day activists need really to understand the whole framework of the UNFCCC, the Climate Change Convention, and its spirit. Climate change is a problem which has been created And it is an historic problem, though there are current challenges, of course, in our process of development, the mode of production and consumption. So when we ask it about from African perspective, I know she talks about that African government do not take action. All studies are actually pointing that we in Africa have done more than we could based on our capacity and capability. So it is not that African government are reluctant into putting money into climate finance. There is even no that money. We don't have that money. And so that is why we insist that resources for climate action should come first and foremost from those who caused the problem. And so even if Africans do whatever we can, I tell people, even if we turn the whole of Congo Basin green without the commitment from the industrialized countries, because they are reluctant, then living their own profligate lifestyles and leaving Africa to clean their mess, then that will never work.
Thank you. No, thank you so much, Mitika. I hear you. I hear you on that one. Polluter pays. Okay, so because I only have 5 minutes, I'm going to give each of the panelists just 1 minute each to tell me, to answer one question. What are we looking for from COP26 to help Africa realize these NDCs that we're putting forward? Louise, first you. 1 minute.
Thank you. So I just want to say that in the Q&A, there is from Mr. Inusa, speaking from the Sahel part of Nigeria, you know, which is, he, in his comment there, he's posing very, very clearly, you know, the kinds of impacts that are hitting Africa and the poorest among the poor. And so, you know, if I pick up on Matika's points and the previous speaker's point, absolutely what Africa needs from COP26 is very high ambition from the developed countries. And I speak from a country where we are historically responsible for about 1% of the problem we sit with. So we must carry our own responsibility, but we really have to see strong action from those developed countries and those big emitters. And in parallel with that, the finance must flow to the developing world.
Okay.
So they must also put their money where their mouth is.
The money where their mouth is. Great. Last one, Matteo.
So I think that from COP, I would like to see the very exact numbers and figures of, which is something that I think that Louise is mentioning, around commitments from developed economies, and see how we can basically tap those commitments, exact figures. We want to know how much they're willing to commit in order to basically support climate actions. Because at the moment, yes, there have been commitments, but it's historically we know that it's not been easy to basically both realize and actualize and use. So something a bit more concrete, I would say, specific figures.
Good. Thank you, Mitika. One last one. What do you want to see? I know you've mentioned a lot, but anything to add?
Yeah. For Africa, actually, it's just one because others have been mentioned, is we as civil society and our governments, including the African group of negotiators, have been pushing one very key outcome, which we did not achieve in COP25, recognition of Africa as a special circumstance and needs region based on science, equity, and justice. So that is one of the key things which we are pushing there, among others, because there is no time. I will not outline others. Perhaps we'll find another time to do that. But for us, that is very key.
Thank you so much. I mean, can't end where recognition of us, of the special circumstances, science, equity, and justice. And of course, we've talked about finance and of course, more ambition. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking your Sunday afternoon to come and join us as we've launched the study and to discuss these NDCs we want. I think this has been a very, very rich discussion. And we've put a link, Charlie, my colleague, has put a link in here where we will put the recording from this session. I think there's also the copy of the report itself in here. And I hope that we can have this discussion again. You're right, Mithika. There's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot for us to continue talking about. So we look forward to inviting all of you again and having this discussion again. Thank you very much, all of you, and to all my colleagues organizing this. Have a lovely Sunday. The rest, one that's left of it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you to everyone for coming, and to my fellow panelists for very interesting points of view.
Very interesting points of view. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, the panelists. Fantastic.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.